Okay, so for today's lecture, we are focusing on section 1.2 of chapter 1. So more specifically, we are looking at types of data, and there are 4 objectives for this lesson. So first of all, we looked at terminology necessary to understand the other 3 objectives. For the second objective, we need to understand the difference between 2 main categories of variables, which are qualitative and quantitative variables. We also need to distinguish between ordinal and nominal variables. And finally, we also need to understand the difference between discrete and continuous variables. So if we are looking at key terminology for section 1.2, if we're looking at this diagram, it will help us understand the concept here. So if we're looking at in the background, you see this notions of data set. So the data set will include individuals, variables, and data. What is the data set? So the data set is something that you create, and it's often saved as a file that contains all the information that we need in order to analyze data, so to perform statistics. What do we find in a data set? Well, we will find individuals. There are synonyms of the terms individuals. In studies, in research, we can use the term participant or subjects as well. So basically, participants are people who we will collect the information from. So they are participant from the study or from the research for the research project. And these individuals, participant or subjects, will be measured on different variables. So the next concept is the concept of variable. And variable is something that you're trying to measure. So characteristics or their object trying to be measured that relate to the individuals that are part of the study. Okay? And finally, the actual raw data. You will see in the next upcoming weeks, I will refer to raw data quite often, is the same as just using the term data. And it's the actual values of each variable. So the participant will be measured on a variable, and the score that the participant reports or gets is what the raw data becomes. If we're looking at a specific example to help us understand, so let's say we're doing a very simplistic project and we are interested in looking at the age of students in a QM class. So the data set itself will be all the participants and their scores on the variables. Okay, our individuals or participants are the 30 QM students that are actually enrolled to a specific sections of QM. And what are we trying to measure? So the variable itself is age. So this is the characteristic that we are trying to measure. And finally, you have the data or the raw data, which is the actual age that each student will report on the questionnaire or maybe verbally. So that would be the raw data. Okay? So next, we need to understand the difference between the 2 main categories of variables, which are qualitative and quantitative variables. Okay? So starting with qualitative, there's a term built in, the term qualitative, and it is quality. So we are trying to determine the quality of something, or another way to put it, we're trying to classify individuals into specific categories. Okay, so that's a qualitative variable. So basically it is a variable which participant will have to choose from several categories or options. Okay, examples of qualitative variables are race. So if I'm trying to measure the variable race, the possible options that people will choose from are Caucasian, African American, East Indian, Asian, and so on. Same thing with color of hair. So we're looking at possible categories, so blonde, brunette, black hair, red hair, and so on. The other type of variable that we could be dealing with is quantitative. So we're trying to determine the quantity of something. So how much or how many of something there is. So how many of that specific characteristic or object there is. So examples of quantitative variables are if the variable that I was trying to record or to measure is how much money do my students have in their pocket at the moment. So the students would actually tell me I have $5.25, I have $15, I have $12.50. So those are an actual numbers. Age is an example that I use. It's also a quantitative variable. And friends on Facebook. So how many friends Or how many people are you friends with on Facebook? So it's an actual number that would be recorded. Okay? So now if we are focusing back at qualitative variables, we need to understand that this type of variable can be broken down furthermore into two possible types of qualitative variables, ordinal and nominal variable. Okay, so if we're looking at this notions of ordinal variable, so it's a category which the possible answers or choices that participant can choose from can follow a natural order. So the possible answer can follow a natural order. So if we're looking at examples here, so grades. If I'm asking students, what grades did you get in last semester physical education course? And I'm giving them options such as A, B, C, D, and F for fail. Okay, so there's a natural order in the possible answers. So we know that if a student get an A, it is a better grade than if the next students get a B or a C. So there's a natural order. Same thing in reviews of movies. So not in terms of ranking them out of 10, but more in terms of how many stars do you think the movie deserves. So if you give a movie 3 stars and the next movie you watch you only give 1 star, you know that the second movie is worse, is not as interesting as the first movie. So that's a qualitative ordinal variable. Same thing with the size of clothes. Okay, so if I say, what size of clothes do you normally buy at the store? The possible options would be X small, small, medium, large, X large, and so on. So it follows a natural order, as opposed to a qualitative nominal variable. Okay, so the possible answers that people can choose from, so the categories, they don't follow any natural order. They're just possible categories. Okay, so for example, if we go back at my examples of race, possible options that people could choose from could be Caucasian, African American, East Indian, Asian. But just because I put Caucasian first doesn't mean that it's a better race than Asian, which I ranked fourth. There's no natural order, so those are just categories, so that's a nominal variable. Same thing with team names. So if I ask you, what is your favorite NHL team, and I put all the possible 30 teams, I could place them in alphabetical order, or I could place them based on the divisions that they belong to, but there's no order there. Okay, so if you circle the first team, if Anaheim Ducks is your favorite team, and it's first because it's the first first team based on alphabetical order, it doesn't mean that this team is better than if you're looking at Nashville Predators, for example. Okay. And finally, if we are looking at quantitative variables, there are also two possible types of quantitative variables. Something can be discrete or continuous. So if we're looking at discrete variables, it is a variable which answers can take on only specific values. So there's no in between that is possible. And a good example of this is shoe size. So if I'm trying to figure out people's shoe size, and I'm asking them to report the shoe size that they normally wear, they would probably say 7.5, 8, 8.5, 10. But there will be no in between, so there will not be something like 10 and 3/4. So it's only very specific values. Same thing with goals scored. So you scored 1 goal, 2 goals, 3 goals, or 0 goal. You didn't score a goal and a half. Same thing with how many different emails account do you have? Well, you can't really have an account and a half. Okay, so that's a discrete variable. And finally, you can have continuous variable. So continuous variables, it's the opposite of what discrete variable is. So it can take on any values in a specific given interval. So an interval that makes sense to the actual variables. So for example, if I'm trying to find out commute time, and I want to know how long did it take you to come to school this morning. Well, the possible values that you can give me would range from 0 if you actually slept here to a couple of hours if you were stuck in traffic. Okay, so that's a continuous variable. Amount of money in pocket, well, you can have cents, so it doesn't have to be $1, $2, $5, $10. You can have $7.25, 30 cents, 45 cents. So it's a continuous variable. Same thing with weight. If we're looking at some scales, they can be actually quite precise and even give you decimals with your weight. So it could be 130.5, 130.7, and so on. Okay, so there it is. Those were the 4 objectives for the section 1.2 of chapter 1.